Hey guys, my name is Eric Crooks. I'm one of the founders of Drash, and today we're going to talk about creating a resource, what that is in Drash, and plugging it into a server, and seeing how we can create a server using a resource and making it all work. So, a resource in Drash is just an object that clients can interact with via GET request, POST request, the HTTP verbs. And if we go to the MDN, which is what Drash defines, which is what Drash uses to define resources, we'll see that a target of an HTTP request is called a resource, and the name is not defined any further, so it can be pretty much anything. We use this because in Drash, when we think of an endpoint like, say, /users, that connects to an object that the client wants to interact with. So a user /users will map to a user's resource. And I'll demonstrate this using a simple example in a little bit. But that's resources are something different when it comes to web frameworks. You don't really see them a lot. A lot of times you see a router, controllers, MVC type stuff, but this kind of logic is it's pretty fundamental. It's and it's backed by the MDN. So to get started with creating a resource, and I already have one up here, creating a resource and seeing how it plugs into Drash. What we want to do is import the Drash namespace from Deno land, and at the time of this version, at the time of this video, the Drash version is v1.0.6, and once we have access to the namespace, we can create our resource. Now, Drash has a base resource class that all resources need to extend, and the reason for this is because there are typings in place in the framework that are checked. For example, the static paths property. If resources don't define their own paths, which is the same thing as a route or an endpoint, a URI, then the server won't compile. So to build a resource, we have to extend drash.http.resource, and we also have to define its endpoints that targets can use, or that clients can use. So if we want clients to access this home resource from this endpoint, then we just define that endpoint like that. If we want them to interact with it via GET request or POST request, we just define those methods. Just like that. Same thing goes for all of the HTTP verbs. So you can have patch, you can have delete, and the framework will register all of those as well. But let's start with the GET request. In a resource, you create the response that you want the client to receive. So we're all familiar with response bodies or response data. In Drash, we use the response body. So we can do hello world. That would be the response body if a client were to access this resource here. And what they would get is the response. You always return the response in a resource because the resource builds the response, and then that response gets sent to the client. So what we want our response to be is hello world on a GET request, and we want to plug that into a Drash server. So creating the Drash server, we need access to the namespace again. It's a drash.http.server. We'll plug in the resources, which the resources config right here takes in an array of resources, which is home resource is the only one we have, and then we'll run the server with some HTTP options. The HTTP options are simply a host name and port. I like using 1447. And will give us some nice output just to make sure that our server is running. Server running X. So these are properties that you can access directly off of the server object once it's constructed. Give some nice output. And over here, we will run our server. Oh, we got an error. C3 extends. There we go. So now compiles, the server runs, and let's make a GET request to /endpoint to see hello world. Since this is our only resource, if somebody tries to go to users, that's not found, that returns the 404 not found error. Because it's not defined, you would need a resource to handle that. Now, if this resource would change to home, let's restart our server, and then we do a curl request. It's not found because now the resource moved to home. But what about if we want to do patch requests, post requests, and delete request any HTTP verb? That's as simple as just creating a body, returning the response, and yeah, let's do delete world, patch world, and post world. So we're going to let that compile. What we expect when we send a post request is the body will say post world. What we expect when we send a patch request is the response body will be patch world, and so on. For delete, we'll see delete world. So if I send this patch request right here, what I expect is a response body of patch world. And there we go. We have patch world. We have delete world. We have post world. And we have hello world. So that's pretty much it. That's a pretty quick rundown of how resources work in Drash, how they plug into a server, pretty much how the syntax works. You need paths, you need to define the endpoints, the URIs for this resource. You define the HTTP verbs that clients are allowed to call, so get, post, patch, delete. I can't remember the other ones. But that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.